Let's start off with the champion, Leon Edwards.
I said I couldn't do it. Look at me now.
Leon Edwards just beat Colby Covington in a very convincing fashion, and he also beat Kamaru Usman. So those, in my opinion, gets immediately taken out. I think the number one option would be Belal Muhammad. I understand no one likes Belal, but Belal has warranted enough to guarantee a title shot. I think Belal deserves it. I don't think it's going to be the funnest fight, but I do think Belal deserves it. If it's not him, I would say Shavkat Rakhmonov. I think that is the next bigger fight. Shavkat, although he only beat Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, I think that fight warrants enough of a title shot compared to other guys that are in the division. I would say Belal is number one, and then maybe have Shavkat fight someone else. We'll explain later, but I think Shavkat should fight someone else before getting the title shot. I have Belal as kind of my clear number one option for Leon Edwards. We have Kamaru Usman as the number one contender still. Andy made a beautiful video of Kamaru Usman. You guys can check that out. But I do think Kamaru Usman needs to fight one of these newer guys, and I think Shavkat is the perfect fight for that. Shavkat deserves it, and Shavkat also doesn't really deserve a title shot. No one's sitting here and saying Shavkat deserves a title shot. The only reason people want Shavkat to actually fight Leon is because no one wants to see Belal fight. That's the main issue that is going on in this welterweight division, that we haven't had any fights go on, but a lot of people don't want Belal as even a chance of being champion. And so they're trying to warrant the Shavkat push, which I don't think it's necessary, because I think he still needs one more fight to really prove himself. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson is a great fighter, but he's old. He's 41. He's 9th in the rankings now. He doesn't warrant an actual reason why you'd fight a title. No one fights a number 9 guy and then fights for a title next, unless it's short notice, unless it's any of those caveats. You don't warrant a title shot, which is why I think Kamaru Usman and Shavkat is a very good fight. If Shavkat wins, he gets a guaranteed title shot. If Kamaru Usman wins, then you might have him fight the loser of Leon Belal, and if he wins that, he has another fight for a title. That could also help Kamaru Usman tremendously. And so in my opinion, I think Kamaru Usman and Shavkat Rakhmonov is the fight to make. Now we go to Shavkat, and I just said Shavkat versus Usman, but I also think you could do another title eliminator of Shavkat JDM, Jack Della Maddalena.
Shavkat Rakhmonov, I think me and you could make a hell of a title eliminator. One of the best in the business. Let's go.
Well, that would be a fantastic fight, sir. Congratulations on an absolutely huge victory.
I think that fight is another title eliminator. If any of them win, it is propelling them right to a title shot, right to the winner of Leon Belal. If any of them lose, then you could have them fight, you know, one of the up-and-comers that is happening in this 170 division, because this 170 division is a mesh of old versus the new. You have new guys like Shavkat, JDM, Ian Machado Garry, Sean Brady, but then you also have old guys. You have Usman, Covington, Gilbert Burns, Stephen Thompson, Jeff Neal, Vicente Luque. You have all those old in with the new, and so it's such a mesh of different fighters. If you want to do something of new versus new, it would be Shavkat JDM for a title eliminator. We have Colby Covington as the number 4 ranked. He kind of just lost all his fans. He is completely out of the water when it comes to fame anymore, because people just have so much hatred for him. He did not fight against Leon Edwards. He talked the most shit, talked about shit about Leon Edwards' dad, which I think is way out of line.
Saturday night, I'm gonna bring you to a place you never want to be. I'm gonna bring you to 7th layer hell.
Okay.
No, I'm bringing you to 7th layer hell. We'll say what's up to your dad while we're there.
And then he proceeds to do nothing with it. And so it just makes no sense for Colby right now to even get a top 5 fight. I think he has to fight one of the people behind him, and my number 1 option is Ian Machado Garry. Ian Machado Garry is semi-deserving of this, but on top of that, they're already chirping at each other.
Kobe's a piece of and I'd love to absolutely flatline him and take him out of this division forever.
This might be one of the most hated fights we've ever seen. Colby Covington either A, gets all the fans back because of this Machado fight, or B, doesn't, and it just ends up being both people just getting booed out of their minds. I think option A might actually happen, given that Colby will be able to mesh with the fans. But I think that is the proper fight to make with Colby, since Colby is in such a weird spot. He only fights once a year, and when he does, he clamors for anyone that is above him. He didn't really deserve a title shot against Leon Edwards, and a lot of people were already stating that, and so it makes no sense for him to fight someone above him. So I think that is the fight to make. Another fight I have with Colby, I think, would be a rematch between him and Kamaru Usman. That third fight, although it doesn't really mean anything now, but it would garner a lot of attention since they've already fought twice and both fights have been bangers. And so I think that rematch would be a wonderful fight to have on 303, 304, any of the pay-per-view events. If that would be the featured fight on the main card, that'd garner a lot of attention. I think that fight is something to make if you are trying to get these two out of the division, because Usman's on the trailing edge and Colby looks like he's already off the edge. It looks like he already jumped. I would have that fight as maybe something on a main card of a pay-per-view. Then we go to number 5. They're very new in the number 5. We have JDM, who just got a win over Gilbert Burns, and given this win streak, given everything that's going on, I think my number 1 and 2 options is something I've already repeated. It's either the Shavkat fight or the Kamaru Usman fight. I don't think JDM has warranted a title shot the way that Bilal did, the way that Shavkat has. Even though I do think JDM beating Gilbert means more than Shavkat beating Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, the issue is that everyone's just clamoring for Shavkat because of the hype of Shavkat. And so I think Rakhmonov versus JDM is my number 1 pick for JDM. I think a title eliminator is exactly what it's needed. I also think a title eliminator against Usman is exactly what's needed. In my opinion, I'm going to play Uncle Dana. I'd be way more excited for JDM versus Shavkat. That fight sounds absolutely insane. But if I had to go with the second option, it would be JDM versus Kamaru Usman. Number 6, brother, is Gilbert Burns. I think Gilbert Burns is in a weird spot. He just lost to JDM, so he shouldn't fight anyone in the top 5. I'm going to give him Sean Brady. I think Sean Brady is the kind of under the radar fight that could happen, that everyone's clamoring for, or everyone is, when the fights get announced, gets super excited for, because that is 2 grapplers going at it. And it's very interesting to see grappler versus grappler, because then they end up being strikers and they start fucking hammering it in. So I'd love to see that fight. I think that's the number 1 option for Burns. If not, I would give Burns Jeff Neal maybe. If you are trying to push Jeff Neal, if you are trying to get him to that level, I don't think it makes any sense to do Jeff Neal. The only real sense, in my opinion, for Gilbert is Sean Brady. I don't think Gilbert versus MVP would ever happen, because they're trying to push MVP very slowly, and I don't think that's the fight to make. And so MVP is in a weird position, but I don't think they'd give him Gilbert Burns. But if they do, I would love to see that fight. Actually, I'm putting that as my second option. I put Gilbert Burns versus MVP, because MVP versus Gilbert would be a tale of, is the speed such a big issue in this division? And if you are trying to solve this question mark of MVP, I think that's the fight to make in the second option. But the number 1, in my opinion, would be Sean Brady. Now, Ian Machado Garry, I just talked about him versus Colby since they've been clamoring, but my number 2 option, my original option before they started talking to each other, was Michael Venom Page. Michael Venom Page against Ian Garry is a tale of 2 different types of strikers. We have the overly technical, and he's trying to piece you apart with his jab and then calf, and then he's giving you all these sorts of looks, to a guy who's giving you looks in a completely different format, with the jumping and the amount of speed that MVP does get into the fight. It would be a super interesting fight to see of how Garry could possibly solve the riddle, or if no one can solve this riddle of MVP and can take him to the top 5 of the division. I would love to see that fight. I think that fight would be more interesting than the Colby fight, but I can understand in Ian Garry's perspective, Colby is number 4 while MVP is number 13 and he just entered the division. I think that fight is my number 2 option. And number 8 is Sean Brady. Sean Brady, my number 1 option was him against Gilbert Burns. I think that is a good fight for both of them. But my number 2 option would be Vicente Luque. That fight was supposed to happen and then it got scrapped. It was supposed to be an AC. I am from Jersey. I was very depressed. because that fight is very interesting to me. And so for my number 2 option, I'd give him Vicente Luque, but my number 1 would be Gilbert Burns. If you are trying to change the old with the new, that is a perfect fight to make, to figure out, is Sean Brady going to be a top 5 in the next 2 years, next 3 years in the future with Shavkat, JDM, Bilal, Leon, all those types of guys. This fight against Gilbert would determine that. Now, number 9, we have Wonderboy. Now, this is such a weird position for Wonderboy, because if you were Uncle Dana, you would say, oh, this is easy, Wonderboy versus MVP. However, they're best friends.
And my man Michael Venom Page is in the house. This dude has been crushing it.
And so most likely Stephen Wonderboy Thompson will not fight Michael Page. And then when you go into the rankings, him against Sean Brady doesn't make sense. Machado Garry makes semi-sense. Jeff Neal doesn't make sense. They already fought. Vicente Luque doesn't make sense. They already fought. Neil Magny makes 0 sense. Kevin Holland makes 0 sense. And so you get into this weird lull with Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, where the only fight that looks like can be made is him against Machado Garry. It's the only fight that makes sense. It's the only fight that Wonderboy might accept, because Wonderboy has said that he only wants to fight strikers now. But if he doesn't fight MVP, there is no striker in the division that makes any relative sense other than Machado Garry. And so I guess that would be my number 1 option, even though I don't think it is a possibility. I don't think that does happen, of Stephen Wonderboy Thompson versus Machado Garry. I have more faith in Machado Garry versus MVP than Wonderboy versus Garry. At number 10, we have Jeff Neal. Just lost to Machado Garry, but I think his is a little bit more simpler. I think the number 1 option would be Michael Venom Page. That fight is very interesting with the striking of Jeff Neal and how that can relatively be a positive or maybe a negative due to the speed advantage that Michael Venom Page has against this whole division. So Jeff Neal, I think MVP is my number 1 option, but number 2, I would give it to Kevin Holland. I think that fight would also be very exciting. Even though Kevin Holland just lost, it makes no sense why he would go up in the rankings, but there is no other options for Jeff Neal. I don't think he warrants a fight above him. I don't think he warrants a fight against anywhere in the top 10, because he is number 10. So I think he needs to move back in the division, and I think Michael Page is the number 1 fight to have, and if it's not that, then it should be Kevin Holland. Now, Vicente Luque has a fight. He is fighting Jaquan Buckley. I just figured that out. But if he does get past Buckley, which I think he will, I think the winner of Jeff Neal, Michael Venom Page, or the loser of Ian Garry Wonderboy, if that fight does happen, or the loser of Sean Brady, Gilbert Burns, I think the loser of any of those fights that I've mentioned makes sense for Vicente, because Vicente is coming off of a win against RDA, who isn't even in the division now, but before that was kind of losing. And so I think the loser of any of those fights would make sense for Vicente, given he's number 11 and all the fights I mentioned is above the rankings. And so I think Vicente is in a weird spot. He's now fighting someone behind the rankings, way behind the rankings. And if he does beat him, then it will make sense to move him up. And I think the loser of any of the 3 fights that I just mentioned should be against Vicente Luque next. Now, I think from 12 to 15, other than Michael Venom Page, I think everyone has to fight someone behind the ranking, someone that isn't ranked. And for my opinion, I think Neil Magny should fight Randy Rude Boy Brown or Rinat Fakhretdinov. And I think if you are picking either Randy Brown to fight Neil Magny, I think Rinat should fight Kevin Holland. It's same goes both ways. If you want to give Randy Brown Kevin Holland, then Rinat should fight Neil Magny. I think that is the semi-logical thing to do, since Randy Brown and Rinat are basically clamoring and are on the door of this top 15. And so if you are willing to do that, I think that is the main fight. I think Neil Magny against Rinat would be very interesting, and Randy Rude Boy Brown against Kevin Holland would be very interesting. And so I think that would be my fights to make in this division, would be Randy Rude Boy Brown versus Kevin Holland. 2 lengthy fighters, 2 lengthy strikers. See how that fight goes. And then also Rinat, a Russian wrestler, against the clinch fighting and the wrestling of Neil Magny would be very interesting. Would be semi-boring, but would be an interesting tell of who would win that one. So I think those fights are kind of tailored to this division. And last but not least, it is Michael Chiesa in the top 15. And I think Michael Chiesa should fight Michael Morales, another new guy in this division. I think Michael Morales does deserve it, given he is on a absolute tear. He's won his last 4, whatever. He's undefeated in the UFC, and so I think Michael Morales deserves that against Michael Chiesa, and it will warrant the top 15 spot. And if he doesn't win, then it will tell you that Michael Chiesa is still in this, because no one really knows where Michael Chiesa's head is at. His last fight was in 2023, and it was a loss against Kevin Holland, but before that he didn't fight for 2 years, and he lost to Sean Brady and Vicente Luque, and so he's on a 3-fight skid. There's a good chance he might get cut after this if he does lose to Michael Morales. That is it for the top 15, but I also want to name off some unranked fighters who could possibly fight each other, and I think it is a semi-logical fight. I think Nicholas Dalby versus Gunnar Nelson makes a lot of sense, given these both are, one is Icelandish, the other one is Danish. This could be a perfect fight under a London card or any European card. Surprisingly, they have never fought each other. I just looked it up because I swear I remember this fight, but they have never fought each other, and so this fight would be very interesting. I think that makes a lot of sense in the division. I have Ponzinibbio versus Chaos Williams. That fight is just absolute bangers waiting to happen, and I think that's a wonderful fight to have on a prelim, on a early prelim, if you are going to a pay-per-view, or maybe even a fight night main card. One guy I do want to point out is Phil Rowe. Phil Rowe is very underrated in my opinion, even though he is coming off of a loss against Neil Magny. I think Phil Rowe does deserve someone like maybe Daniel Rodriguez or Jake Matthews, or if you want to do prospect versus prospect who are both coming off of one loss, it would be him against Mike Malott. That fight also makes the most sense in my opinion, because they're both coming off losses against Neil Magny. They are both prospects. They are both still pretty hyped up in terms of what the fight, what the future is looking like for 170. I say pair those two up, and it could be a great fight in the prelims. And one of my last fights to make, because I would love to talk about Mikhail Orobai, because he is a very talented fighter, but he already has a fight against Elvis Brenner. I would love to talk about Kevin Jousset, but he already has a fight. I think the last guy to talk about is the most forgotten man of all time, is the Leech, Li Jingliang, and I think he should fight Gabriel Bonfim. I think they're both coming off of losses. Gabriel Bonfim is still trying to get propelled because of the Bonfim brothers. I think the Leech would be a wonderful fight to see. How good is Gabriel Bonfim? Is the last fight just a fluke? Is the Leech still in this division? Because being kicked out of this top 15 is saying a lot, because the Leech has only lost one fight after the Chimaev, and it was Daniel Rodriguez that he took on 4 hours notice. The Leech has been very disrespected, is very forgotten for some reason, and I think he deserves a fight against Gabriel Bonfim to try to get some sort of recognition back, because who does not like the Leech? Guys, let me know in the comments what you think about my matchmaking. Let me know what fights you would want to see, what fights you would want to make. It's been Santi. It's been Studs.